All right. Is cultural relativism a better approach to culture than ethnocentrism? By Kevin Gazeldi. Just a disclaimer for everybody watching. I'll be covering some sensitive topics from history, so just be aware of that before heading into the presentation. Okay. First off, what is culture? Before we really dive into the question, we got to understand the aspects of it. Starting off, what is culture? Well, culture is a word with many definitions, and there are many different examples of culture. Yet all of those draw us to roughly the same conclusion. Culture can be seen as a complex web of social structures and systems between a group of people. It can also be seen as different ideals, values, beliefs, structures, teachings, knowledge, etc., that are held by a group of individuals. Around the world, there are many different cultures hailing from everywhere. Each religion has its own culture, each country, each city, each neighborhood, and so on. As long as there is a group of individuals brought together by ideals, values, beliefs, or any other aspects, there is a culture. All right, so here I prepared a little bit of an exercise based on what I just showed on culture. So below you, you're about to see three different groups presented. Out of these three groups, which one of them can be seen as a cultural group? I'll give you a quick second to form your answer. Okay, now I'm going to reveal the answer. You should have guessed based on what we just covered on the last slide that all of these are examples of culture. Each one of these could be cultural groups, so no matter what you picked here, you are correct. All right. Now we're going to get into some deeper topics. Here we're going to cover cultural relativism and ethnocentrism. Both of these are ways of judgment towards cultures, yet they both hold completely opposing values and views. Both of these forms of judgments can be seen as two sides of the same coin. Let's first start with cultural relativism. What is cultural relativism? We know it's a method of judgment and observation towards cultures, but how does one judge using cultural relativism? Well, it's the recognition that one doesn't need to agree with a culture, but one must be prepared to judge it on its own terms. Before you judge a culture, you should be able to understand its cultural practices from the ones that engage it. Now we can move on to ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is a way that opposes the ideology of cultural relativism. Ethnocentrism is the practice of judging another's culture based on its own cultural ideals and terms. Ethnocentrism is the belief that one's culture is better than all others. Okay, now that we've defined both of these methods of cultural approach, we can finally compare them. Not just in theory, but we can look at the applications both historically and how we can apply them in the future. Here's ethnocentrism in the real world. Here I've gathered some of the major applications of ethnocentrism we have seen in the past and one interesting way ethnocentrism is being used in the present. The first major application that I've gathered takes us back to Germany circa 1939. Here we see the rise and fall of the Nazi regime. Now, this regime was based on many different political factors, such as a terrible economy, a low morale population, and crippled infrastructure. All of these were factors in this regime rising and then going on to wage war in Europe. However, the leading motivator for Hitler and his regime would be his heinous ethnocentric views. As we saw in the tragic events of the Holocaust, millions of ethnic Jewish people across Europe would be killed. Now, some of the reasons Hitler went through with such acts was because he believed that the ethnic Aryan German people were just superior to all other people. He was using ethnocentric ideals. Another tragic application in history that we can attribute to ethnocentric thinking is the horrible saga of American slavery. We saw this act across America from the mid 1700s all the way until 1865. Although slavery was abolished, racism still runs rampant all over North America, even into our current day. Now, the foundation of slavery started with an ethnocentric mindset. It was based on the fact that European settlers believed they were better than African people in every single way. The American people and the European settlers did not try to learn from the African people or even observe them. They believed they were just better. Now, this led to slavery and eventually the American Civil War, in which we saw the divide of the country over the freedom of slaves. In the end, when the war was finished in 1865, we saw the abolishment of slavery. With this came the creation of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. To sum them up, they essentially stated that slavery will be no more in America. Every person born on American soil is considered American, and no matter the race, ethnicity, or any biological factors, all American citizens are allowed to vote. This was the turning point for ethnocentric thinking in North America. Still, racism is a problem in North America and mostly everywhere around the globe, but this was the first turn away from ethnocentric thinking. In America, everyone was legally seen as equal. Over the years, people started to judge less on the skin color or how one looks, and now we see a more diverse mixing pot of people and cultures. Now that we've looked at some examples of ethnocentrism in our past, we can take a look at an interesting take on ethnocentrism happening in our present day. Some places in Africa, especially South Africa, are trying to think more ethnocentrically. They believe that the colonization of their country has rid them of their old cultures. They are trying actively to encourage an ethnocentric view on their culture as they move to decolonize parts of their country. So maybe ethnocentrism isn't all that bad. It just depends on the application of it. Though, as history tells, it is applied in more bad ways than it is in good. Alright, let's play a game. On the next slide, I've prepared a little question or game. Here, you can use our newfound outlook and knowledge on ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. Okay, in this game, you are an explorer who has stumbled upon a new land. In this new land, you explore a little bit until you encounter a man. This man's name is Paul. Now that you have met Paul, you're faced with a decision and have multiple ways to react to Paul. So, do you A, instantly believe that you are superior to Paul in every way? B, try to communicate with Paul and learn more about him before making any rash decisions? Or C, do you attack Paul instantly? Now, take a little time here to get your answer ready, and I'll get back to you in a second. Okay, let's go over the answers now. If you picked A, you might be using some ethnocentric thinking there. And in this application, that might not be the best for you, or especially for Paul. If you picked B, there's a good chance you have a level head and you're using cultural relativism. You know nothing about Paul, so you want to learn more before you make any rash decisions. And finally, if you pick C, there's a good chance you should seek therapy, as Paul has done nothing but stand there. Alright, now we could take a look at cultural relativism and how it can help in the world. Cultural relativism can bridge the gap that ethnocentric thinking leaves in this world. As we know, it doesn't allow for us to jump to conclusions. I want us to take their time in learning about a culture before they're able to judge it properly. Now, taking what I just said, imagine if this theory had been applied in different times in history. What would our world look like if the people in the past resorted to cultural relativism rather than thinking ethnocentrically? Taking World War II. What would that war have looked like if Hitler wasn't thinking ethnocentrically? Would he have committed the same atrocities? Would the war even happen? Or take a look even further back in history to the American slavery. If the American colonists and European settlers had approached the African people with more cultural relativism, they could have learned great things from them and even created strong allies. Unfortunately, these events have already transpired and cannot be changed. But using the correct thinking, we can still affect the future. One situation we can apply cultural relativistic thinking to is the state of Islamophobia and the discrimination of Middle Eastern people post 9/11. After the tragic event that took place on September 11, 2001, the Muslim community was looked at much worse than they were before. People began to look at Muslim people as threatening, using words like terrorist or radical to describe regular people. Hate crimes against Muslim people rose 1,617% in 2001 compared to the year 2000, according to an ABC News article. Muslim people were even weaponized by politicians. People would call Barack Obama a closeted Muslim, as if that was an insult. Donald Trump went on to make a travel ban for countries that were a majority Muslim population. We even saw tragic events like the Whitchurch mosque shootings in New Zealand, where 50 people were killed. Now, all of this started because terrorist groups were based out of Islamic countries. Therefore, people automatically assume that all Muslims are violent and radical. This is an ethnocentric way of thinking. If people only looked at Muslim culture with cultural relativism, they would have seen that it is a culture and religion of love and peace, not one of violence. A different judgment could have been made in 2001 after the attacks. Even now, there's still rampant Islamophobia all across the globe, which could have easily been disbanded if people looked at it relativistically. Okay. That wraps up my presentation today. For those of you who took the time to watch it, thank you. I appreciate it. On the next slide here, I've left you 3 discussion questions. Other than that, thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.